Hello, this is Bruce Springsteen's autobiography, written in 2017, Born to Run. It's quite a big book. Very quickly, in terms of Springsteen, I first came across him or listened to him properly in 1981. I worked in an office. There were three of us in the office, and the boss was a big Bob Dylan fan, as I was. And then we had a chap with us who was 5 or 10 years younger than us. He used to pull our legs a bit about Dylan, being an old has-been by that stage, and said, "You really ought to listen to Bruce Springsteen." There he is, look, the old Dylan. Been very wary about the hype about the new Dylan, and but I hadn't been to a concert for ages. I had family and work commitments and very, very little money. So we did go, the three of us went, and I bought the River, which was Springsteen's latest, and listened to that over and over again in the car, trying to kind of familiarise myself with the stuff. And I was quite impressed by a lot of it, but it didn't seem to me to be the at the time the sort of standard of music that I could really enjoy. So we went, the three of us, to Stafford agricultural shed, some massive, great impersonal hangar, and we saw Springsteen that night, and it was quite an incredible concert. I really envied the people around me who were singing along to every word. They knew all the songs, which I didn't. But the spectacle of it, I mean, we know about Springsteen's legendary stage shows now, sliding across the floor on his knees, jumping up and down off the piano, sweat pouring off him, and just the kind of endless energy. And we had to leave at about 11:15 at night because we had to get home. We had a journey. He was still going strong, and he was singing Quarter to Three by Gary U.S. Bonds, which I'd kind of grown up on in my local fairground, listening to on the jukebox, and had never heard again. So all that kind of history and root in rock and roll was well presented, as well as all these songs of his own. I've got a friend who doesn't think that much of Springsteen and dismisses him as being full of stadium pomp. That was his phrase. And I thought, well, yeah, he does have that stadium pomp, and great. It's fabulous entertainment. I've seen Springsteen a few times since then. I saw him in Sheffield around about 87, and then just a little bit afterwards at Wembley when he was part of the Amnesty International tour with Sting and Peter Gabriel and Tracy Chapman, and he finished with a magnificent kind of ensemble version of Chimes of Freedom, and that was quite a magical evening. Saw him again only just before we had the pandemic in Manchester, and he was a bit more portly then, and he couldn't jump about quite as much, but he did all those songs from the period of the River, and was very, very impressive. There's another side to Springsteen as well, which is a much more contemplative and thoughtful side. And in Nebraska, the album in the early 80s kind of exemplified that. And I've just been listening again recently to The Ghost of Tom Joad, which is full of these beautiful, wistful identification with the underdog. And they feel very well written, and they feel very sincerely performed. So there is that side of Springsteen as well. It's almost as if when he's had enough of the stadium pomp, he goes back to something that's a kind of bit more emotionally anchored. Anyway, that's my kind of history with Springsteen. I've not kept up with some of the latest stuff. I wasn't particularly impressed by the kind of tribute album he did to Pete Seeger. I don't know, that just felt a bit forced to me, but I know others like it. But let's come to the book. As I say, it's a big book. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I'd have to say there were places where it dragged a bit for me. I mean, he clearly has really enjoyed revisiting his youth when, instead of getting a job, he was working with his band, and they were trying to just make it to a local dance hall gig or whatever. And he writes in quite detail about that whole period when they're just teenagers, really, trying to achieve something in music. And it's a touching story. For me, it was too long and too detailed, but I can understand why Springsteen wanted to, if you like, indulge himself a bit on that. And also maybe, really big fans or people who are kind of into that world themselves or want to be into that world might identify with it a bit more than I did. I think that there are other areas in this book where it's just superb. It surprised me just how good it was. I hadn't expected to kind of hear such a thoughtful, sensitive, introspective and honest and humble account from somebody who, must you'd imagine must find it very hard to be humble really when he's standing out in front of, hundreds of thousands of screaming, adoring fans. But I thought there was a real human being in here. Let me just finish by reading what I wrote in my reading diary at the time. I enjoyed this big book. Springsteen tells his musical autobiography, but he also comes across as a very self-aware individual. He mentions his 25 years plus of therapy, and it shows in the non-exhibitionist way he records his love and his admiration for his wife Patty and their 3 children. The great strength of this book for me was his very honest account of his difficult relationship with his father, who was diagnosed late on as a paranoid schizophrenic. Springsteen's inability to love and his simultaneous desire for love led to a resistance to having a home and a family on his part, he now acknowledges. The intensity of performing all that stadium pomp is presented as a means of keeping his depression at bay. It's a very moving tale of redemption. He writes it very, very well and in a very self-aware fashion, I felt, without pretense. Very, very good. And I think knowing what I know now about him, what he now knows about himself, it makes it much more understandable, the kind of quality of his writing and the great passion and the great honesty that's there, which I think, lots and lots of us see in his work. So Born to Run is fabulous. I mean, there's great bits about being a dad. He describes his one of his sons who's in a rock band with his mates, and Springsteen is driving them to some gig or whatever, and they're not the slightest bit interested in Springsteen and all his fame and whatever. They just want to talk about the gig they've been to, and and they want to talk about themselves as budding musicians. And I thought it's just very touching. He's just a dad with teenage kids. So he really does come across as a rounded individual, and I think that's really creditable and really surprising for somebody with his level of fame and wealth and all the rest of it. It must be hard to be an ordinary human being at the same time, and I think this book is a very honest and interesting account. So as you can probably tell from what I'm saying, I'm recommending it very, very highly indeed. Thank you.